All right, today we're diving into the central theory of G. Edward Griffin's very controversial book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Now, it tells a story about how America's central bank was created, that is, well, a world away from what you probably learned in history class. And it all kicks off with a very secret trip. So picture this. It's a cold November night back in 1910. As the book tells it, there's this private, totally unmarked train car just sitting at a quiet station in New Jersey. One by one, some of the most powerful men on the planet start to arrive, all very hush-hush. One of them even brings a shotgun to make it look like he's just a duck hunter. Their secret destination? A private island off the coast of Georgia. So what was this all about, right? Well, these guys represented the Morgan, Rockefeller, and Warburg financial dynasties. We're talking about a group of men who controlled roughly a quarter of the entire world's wealth at the time. They were about to spend a week hammering out the blueprint for the Federal Reserve. But the book asks this really provocative question. Was their goal really to protect the public, or was it to protect themselves? According to the source, the plan they cooked up on Jekyll Island had nothing to do with public service. Nope, it was all about private power. The book makes the case that what these financiers really designed was, for all intents and purposes, a banking cartel, just cleverly disguised as a government agency. Griffin claims their agenda had 5 main goals. It was a playbook to shut down competition from upstart banks, to get the incredible power to create money out of thin air, and to centralize control over all the nation's bank reserves. And here's the really crucial part. The plan was set up to shift any losses from their own risky bets onto you, the taxpayer. And the final piece of the puzzle? Sell the whole thing to Congress and the public as a plan for their own protection. And this, right here, gets to the absolute core of the book's argument. The official story we were all told was that the Federal Reserve would finally rein in Wall Street and look out for the little guy. But the author claims the real purpose was the exact opposite, to cement the power of the biggest banks and put all financial control right in their hands. Okay, but how would this supposed cartel actually pull it off? How would it achieve all those goals? Well, according to the book, it all comes down to a very special, almost magical, mechanism for making money. Griffin gives this process a pretty memorable name, the Mandrake mechanism, which is a nod to an old magician's trick of creating something from nothing. The claim is that the Federal Reserve doesn't just print money, it literally creates it out of debt. Now, the whole system is built on this concept called fractional reserve banking. It sounds complicated, but think of it like this. When you deposit money in the bank doesn't just let it sit in a vault. It's only required to hold on to a tiny fraction of it. The rest? It gets to lend it out. According to the book, this is the master key that unlocks the entire mechanism, and it's where the danger really starts. So, how does this so-called mechanism work in the real world? The book lays it out in 4 steps. First, the government needs money, so it issues debt as government bonds. Then, the Fed buys those bonds with money it literally creates out of thin air. That brand new money then lands in commercial banks, where it becomes reserves. And here's the final incredible twist. The banks can then lend out up to 9 times the amount of those new reserves, causing the money supply to just explode. Now, to support this pretty wild claim, the author points directly to the Federal Reserve's own publications. This quote from the New York Fed is presented as a kind of smoking gun, a direct admission that banks don't just lend out money that already exists. They create new money by turning someone's promise to pay into actual currency. So if this system really exists the way it's described, what are the consequences for the rest of us? The book spends a lot of time on this, in a section it calls The Harvest. The book argues that this power to expand and contract the money supply creates these absolutely devastating boom and bust cycles. It points to the 1920s as the perfect example. First, the Fed allegedly pumps the economy full of easy credit, creating the Roaring '20s. Then in 1929, it slams on the brakes, tightening credit. And here's the stunning claim the book makes, that this move wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate act to trigger the stock market crash and the Great Depression that came after. And what happens when the big fish fail? Well, the book highlights this recurring pattern of bailouts, where the massive losses of huge corporations and banks get transferred over to the taxpayer. The argument is that the system is designed to privatize the profits during the boom, but socialize the losses during the bust. And to really give you a sense of the scale of these bailouts, the book zeroes in on the savings and loan crisis from the 80s and 90s. The final cost to the taxpayer is estimated at a jaw-dropping $500 billion. It's presented as the ultimate price tag for a system where, according to the author, the public always pays for the failures of the powerful. But the book doesn't just stop at the US border. Oh, no. It claims the Federal Reserve model was actually the blueprint for a much larger global financial system. The argument basically goes like this. The Bretton Woods Conference, the one that created the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, was supposedly masterminded by figures like John Maynard Keynes and Harry Dexter White. The book claims their goal was to create a global socialist system funded by an endless fire hose of US dollars, all made possible by the Federal Reserve. The book uses this pretty shocking quote from former Fed Chair Paul Volcker, who said, "A decline in the American standard of living is basically inevitable." The author frames this not as some reluctant warning, but as an open admission, a stated goal of a grand plan for global economic convergence. So, after laying out this whole history of secret meetings, money mechanics, and global plans, what is the book's final conclusion? What's the bottom line? The author puts it in these really stark metaphorical terms. To understand the true nature of the Federal Reserve, this creature, we shouldn't look at its stated goals or its PR. We should just look at the results, at the harvest it's produced over the last century. And this all brings us to the book's ultimate call to action. It lists 7 main arguments for getting rid of the Federal Reserve completely, calling it a cartel that creates inflation, destabilizes the economy, encourages war, and, at the end of the day, works against the very public it's supposed to serve. So in the end, the entire thesis of the book really boils down to this one question. Is the Federal Reserve a protector of the public, or is it the beast of prey from Jekyll Island? That's what the book leaves you to decide.